Hey, this is Nate Wells.
And this is Drew Cove.
Check out our podcast, that Go for Hockey podcast, for the latest news and updates on University of Minnesota hockey. You can find us on iTunes, and we're also on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
That's elite.
The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
Welcome, Giles and Goalie Podcast, the only Minnesota podcast right now not covering a tire fire. No, I'm sorry, the Vikings won today. So, actually, I lied. We are joining the ranks of Minnesota podcasts that cover tire fires.
Yeah, no kidding.
I have to give credit, Ben, to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are doing the Lord's work of taking the limelight off the Minnesota Wild for being a tire fire in this town, because, good Lord, the Minnesota Timberwolves are an utter disaster.
Yeah, the last week has been a very interesting one, to say the least, for Wolves fans, but I don't know, I covered it in my article today on zonecoverage.com that being a Wild fan isn't all roses and sunshine by any stretch either, but at least they don't have major blowouts like this. At least all of their fan abuse is of the minor variety.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yes.
Whereas Timberwolves fans right now are getting death by 1,000 bullets.
Yeah, they're pretty much death by a cannon blast to the chest. Yeah.
I have great pity on those who have continued to hang around with the Wolves for, forever. And
yeah,
last year seemingly was a great turn around the corner, but this summer has been anything but the turn of the corner. And once again, the Timberwolves are showing that they are the most apt-run organization in this town, which really says a lot, because there's a lot of competition for that title, but they take the gold medal far and away.
Yeah, yikes. I guess when you think about it, in the word dysfunction, dysfunction. Yeah, no, there isn't an M and an N. There isn't even an SOTA. We'll have to come up with something cute with it that comes with that, because there's got to be some kind of saying that works there.
Somewhere in the word dysfunction spells out Jimmy Butler.
Well, I mean, the Wolves. Not that he doesn't deserve a lot of criticism, because he does. But the Wolves organization, I think, is probably even got him beat on dysfunction. I mean, I understand his motives, at least. I mean, he's kind of being a douchebag about it, but at least I understand his motives, whereas the Wolves organization is just peeing down their leg.
I am your host, Giles Farrell. On the other side is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And we are just trying to deflect from the Minnesota Wild Week by talking about other Minnesota teams.
I heard the United lost, too. Let's talk about that.
Oh, man. What a... Heath out. Good Lord. Get rid of that guy. They could have been so much better this year, and they just punted in favor of just keeping fan support for another year with the new stadium. So it just another cash grab in this town. So great. Good on you, Minnesota United, for just becoming one of the others. You ruined a good thing.
Yeah. Well, what do you do?
Speaking of ruining good things, the Minnesota Wild are a floundering hockey team that had 4 days off after an abysmal first 2 games of the regular season, and they got back into action Thursday against the Chicago Blackhawks, and this was a game that I don't know how they did, but they pulled it out, a 4-3 win in overtime. The Wild fell down 2-0. They came back to tie the score at 2. Then each team traded a goal in the third period. Then Jason Zucker had the overtime winner. He had a pair of goals in that game, and before the game, I guess Jason Zucker had kind of called on himself, among others, saying it was time for the big money players to step up. So he gave a pair of goals and got the Wild a much-needed 2 points against the hated division rival Blackhawks. He had, and I said this in the post-game video, if you're not following these post-game videos, follow our Facebook channel or our YouTube channel, Giles and the Goalie Podcast. But that felt like a win that was either just going to be like a blip on the radar, or was going to turn the tide for the season, in just the way that the Wild did that, because they got a goal with 23 seconds left in the third period from Ryan Suter to tie the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like the unlikeliest of things, but I don't know. You just had a good feeling after that game, maybe, but maybe it was just also because it was the Blackhawks, and they might not necessarily be all that great when it comes down to it. The Wild did outshoot Chicago 46-30 in the contest, among other things, and another stellar performance by Devin Dubnyk. So it really, after that game, you kind of left feeling good that maybe, the first 2 games the Wild had the season that we talked about last week was a blip on the radar.
Yeah, it really kind of seemed that way when you watched that game on Saturday afternoon, because my Lord, was that Saturday game rough. It didn't seem like they gained any momentum from, what felt like it could have been an emotional victory against the Blackhawks. It just felt like that team got absolutely zero momentum from that win, which is a little puzzling, because it's like, how do you not get momentum from a win like that? I just don't. I don't know. I don't understand.
And again, I kind of expressed these thoughts on the pregame video heading into Saturday's game against Carolina, that the game had the kind of a feeling where the Wild were either going to hold their own or they were going to get run all over, kind of similar to what Colorado does against them in the last year and change. It just, young, fast teams against the Wild typically have their way, and it just, you had that feeling that it was going to happen going into Saturday's game, or the Wild were going to hold their own and do a good job against the young and gun Hurricanes. But as we saw on Saturday late afternoon, which I have a complaint about a 5 p.m. start on a Saturday, mainly for personal reasons. But getting back to the point at hand, in this game, the Wild were just getting demolished. Let's be honest. There's no sugarcoating it. The Wild had 8 shots after 30 minutes of gameplay.
I know.
And it left for a plethora of 80s night references for me to make, which was wonderful. But apparently nobody got those 80s references, so I don't know. I don't understand why anyone follows me on Twitter.com if
it's those goddamn millennials.
All my jokes go unnoticed, I guess. Maybe
I know how
I
you
just
feel.
need to go away for a while like you did.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Hurricanes were massively out-attempting the Wild, and somehow the Wild kept themselves in the hockey game. They never got more than a goal down. They had times there was only 2 times where they were a goal up. Third period goals from Jared Spurgeon, Jason Zucker, Mikhail Granlund either tied the game or gave the Wild the lead, but they could never hold the lead. And the game went to overtime on a very unfortunate carom late in the third for Carolina that allowed Justin Williams to score the tying goal with 1:09 left. And then the winner in overtime from Sebastian Aho, in which we saw the Wild's 3 core players, Mikko Koivu, Zach Parise, Ryan Suter, stuck out on the ice for an ungodly period of time, over a minute. So some very concerning traits again cropping up. But at the end of it, the Wild were outshot 57-23, and that was just shots on goal. We're not counting just shot attempts total. I think
I think their shot attempts was 83.
Yeah, the Hurricanes got up into the 80s for their own shot attempts, and the Wild were somewhere in the low 30s. So not good, but somehow the Wild got a point, and as I threw it out there in the post-game recap, it was plain and simple. Devin Dubnyk stole a point for this team, and he deserved much more than that one singular point that they got. But this is concerning. This is what really concerns. And everyone wants to sit there and complain about the referees, and there were some questionable calls in Saturday night's game, but a lot of what I saw from the Wild in that game has been very evident in the first 4 games, where they're taking these penalties that they aren't moving their feet, and they're hooking and they're slashing, and it's penalties you associate with teams that are slow moving, and that is the big concern I take out of that. Is there were 18 some odd penalties called, and some of them questionable, but when you're just hooking and slashing, that brings up a bigger issue at large, and it concerns me moving forward because a lot of teams in the league are like the Hurricanes. They're young and they're fast, and the Wild don't have an answer for that. They really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, some people, and I don't know how, we won't name names here, but some people have said something to the effect of the Wild being built on speed, or the Wild being a fast team. And it's not the first time I've heard that. I mean, I remember hearing about that. There was something on Wild Extra years ago where somebody
years ago
blamed said something to the effect of this being a fast team. And
back when we were
I
Wild
don't
Stallions.
think that's ever been the case. I don't know. This team has depth, and I think that their defensemen are good skaters. I don't think they have a whole lot of defensemen who are really lumbering. I think Suter skates well, Brodin skates well, Spurgeon skates well, even Dumba skates pretty well. But from the forward side, I mean, who on this team is a burner? Jason Zucker, I think, has wheels, and I think there's kind of a fall off after that. And then you really get into some lumbering guys. Koivu you think of as kind of lumbering. The list is of average or below average skaters on the Wild forward side. I think is not small.
The Wild aren't doing well in the skating department when my girlfriend yells at the TV, "Do these guys know how to skate?"
She's learning so quickly.
Yeah, she's also learned how the goal song was decided this year and became vastly disappointed in the decision by Wild fandom.
Well, anybody with a brain feels the same way, so I mean, I don't want to call anybody out, but like if you're excited about crowd chant, and then I touched on this in my article today, but if you're excited, like genuinely excited, I understand the people that weren't huge fans of Let's Go Crazy. Okay, I can hear that. But if you're excited about the song crowd chant, you really need to reevaluate your musical tastes. It's a shame we didn't do this podcast in person, Giles. Because I have a lot more fun with you when you're all buzzed up when it's in person.
This is what stinks is so sometimes I fumble with constructing words into sentences. And so the original draft of my pregame video before Saturday's game against Carolina, which was 80s night, mind you, which, as I said, I made many references to 80s night. It had a very good jab at the Wild's goal song decision prior to this year.
Sure.
And when I lost my train of thought during the first draft of that, so there was about 10 seconds of dead air, and I had to cut it, and I had to start over. And I didn't write down what I said because there was a very good joke in there. And I completely forgot it in the edition that I actually published. And I'm very angry it didn't. But
sure.
We're going down a weird path here, but because we can sit here all day and go on the goal. We did at the end of the show last week.
Yeah, we did. We don't need to be on it.
Look at last week's show if you want to hear our thoughts on goal songs. But, okay, in 4 games, the Wild have won 1. They've lost 3, and a couple of in overtime. Besides the goaltender, Devin Dubnyk, what, in your opinion, has gone right? Because it's slim pickings.
It really is. I think that I kind of like a little bit of the mixing and matching that Boudreau has done. I think Eriksson Ek had a pretty bad first game, but it seemed like before he got hurt Thursday, it seemed like he was, maybe starting to get a little bit more on the positive side of the ledger. And then, of course, he got hurt, and he's out for allegedly a short period of time here. Hopefully nothing too serious. I like Jordan Greenway playing with Eric Stahl and Zucker. I think that's really a good, positive move for him to get going. I don't know that he hasn't created a ton of offense yet, but I think it's a good thing to have him there. I don't know. I'd like to find more positives, but it's so slim. I mean, you love what you saw out of Zucker on Thursday night against the Blackhawks. I mean, he almost took the game over a little bit. He made a couple of plays. He scored a couple of goals. But that was one game. So it's like, I'm not going to say that Jason Zucker is like this beacon of shining light for the Wild because, he took over one game and kind of won it, by himself, but that was it. We haven't seen him do anything else in any other games. So, it's really slim pickings. I don't know. Do you have anything that stands out?
I mean, I was gonna say Jason Zucker after the first 2 games, and he kind of called himself, among others, out. Saying the big money guys need to step up, and then he's had a very good 2 games.
Yeah,
and the amount of people who have no idea why we call him Steve is absurd. Like,
well, it was kind of a Twitter thing. I know that's
right.
Unfortunately turned into a crappy radio station thing, but it was a Twitter thing first. So,
and I regret captioning that Steve Zucker scores his 100th career goal with the Wild. So many people respond with WTF. It's not easy to find a positive. I mean, it's just so easy to just pick the negatives here, and
Yeah.
I mean, Nino Niederreiter hasn't exactly been overly visible.
No.
Mikael Granlund did not have a point until Saturday night against Carolina.
Yeah.
Eric Stahl has been missing shots that Eric Stahl of last year would have made. It's just a lot of things have not gone the way Wild fans are used to seeing things go, and it is very concerning. And I'm just starting to doubt if there's a way out of it. I've made my reservations about this team known in the first few podcasts of the year, but I just don't know if this team is even gonna cut it close this year.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry,
early in the season about I had some relative positivity, and obviously they've chipped away a bit, not just in the fact that they're 1-2, but how they've lost those games. I mean, they need the one win. They had to pepper Cam Ward, of all freaking goalies, to get a win. And in the other 3 games, I mean, they've been literally played off the ice.
Yeah.
Kind of just happy to be there almost kind of thing. So it's really been, what relative positivity I did have has really kind of been shaken just in a matter of 4 games. And I'm not a big, small sample size guy. I'll be the first to tell you that you need to let the season play out a little bit, but it's hard. It's really hard not to be unenthused with their play, just given how awful they've looked in these first 4 games.
Let's not forget that Cam Ward was stealing the show on Thursday.
I know.
And the Wild had roughly 6 net mouth scrambles that they could not score a goal on. And I don't know. And then on Saturday against Curtis McElhinney, sometimes they were just kind of doing the same thing. Although they scored some pretty nice goals, it felt like if the Wild could pepper the goal a little bit more, they wouldn't have been in the situation they were in. And
yeah.
That was a concern, again, going into that game against Carolina, where Carolina is going to be fast, and they're going to skate circles around the Wild, and the Wild just don't have an answer, and they just get very limited shots on goal. And
yeah.
If you're not able to pepper the opposition's backup goaltender and make him earn that win, then that's concerning, and that's really what we've seen. And man, it's hard to draw positives here out of the first 4 games, and when bloody Russo is all over them in the first 4 games, it's bad. So it's hard to sugarcoat things that you just know aren't good. And that's kind of where the Wild are. And they've squandered 4 very good performances from Devin. And
yeah,
that's really what stinks, is when you're getting elite level goaltending and you don't win. That's not good. And so that kind of segues into the next question, except not really, but we're going to go with it anyway.
Sure.
How do you fix what's wrong with the Wild here? They have exhibited pretty much the same traits in their first 4 games. So how do you go about fixing what's killing them right now?
Well, I think you just you just keep it simple and try to get pucks in deep behind their defensemen and get bodies to the net, and I think good things will happen. But seriously, I mean, it's weird. It feels like it's a talent issue but at the same time, it feels like there's also a motivational context to it. Like it just feels like this team isn't playing anything like we've seen them play when they played well. I mean, we've seen them play bad before. We've seen them play like this before. But we're getting into the territory where this is an extended period of time where they're playing terrible. They're starting this season with a swoon, and that's scary because we've never seen that before, and we don't know how that is going to affect this team down the line. I mean, we've seen mid-season swoons, and they've always been able to rebound from it and be fine, but we've never seen a swoon to start the season before, and that's something that I feel like is a lot harder to recover from. So, I don't know. I'm not at all calling into question Boudreaux, but I feel like there needs to be something tweaked here, to use someone else's term. Something changed here. Something needs to click, and this team needs to find a next level of motivation because it just feels like, they're not playing up to even what they can play up to, and that's not going to fix how bad the fourth line is. We knew that going into the season, the fourth line wouldn't be very good, and certainly injuries. The injury to Joel Eriksson Ek has kind of shuffled the lineup a little bit, but I don't know what else you can do to this team besides hit them with a cattle prod or a hot branding iron. I don't know what else this team needs because they have the talent. That's the sad thing. I mean, their defense is better than this. They've got in their top four defense. I mean, they're all guys that any team would want, and here they are allowing 83 shot attempts in a game to a team that's has some young talent. But let's not confuse the Hurricanes for the Lightning and the Capitals and other teams like that. Let's not pretend like they're even a playoff team because they're not. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of all of it. It's extremely frustrating. I'd like to see them kind of something click and then snap out of it and actually make use of Devin Dubnyk playing out of his mind. But I don't know what it's going to take for them to find that groove.
It's so much more than like system changes. It just. And we're gonna come to this a little bit in our Bruce Boudreau quote of the week, but it's just not good. And we hit on this last week and hit on this in the pregame videos. But if you're not gonna play fast, which the Wild are not, and tangent. I believe it was prior to Thursday's game against the Blackhawks. The Wild, FSN was highlighting how speed needed to be key in the Wild offense. And then they went on to highlight, I think it was like 2 or 3 players and their speed plays up the ice. And the first player that was highlighted was Marcus Foligno. And I'm sorry, but don't get me wrong. Like I think Marcus Foligno is a fine player for what he is, a fourth liner. But if you're relying on him to bring speed and offense to your lineup, then that's a problem. And I just felt like FSN was grasping at straws a little bit with that. And that also just speaks to the fact that the Wild don't have speed.
Yeah, that just, to me, speaks to how tone-deaf FSN is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to employ Greenlay, who basically just repeats what's happening on TV without any insight, or LaPanta, who's kind of an over-the-top homer. But, if you're going to do analysis, don't give me bull like that. I mean, come on. That's just embarrassing. Like, you can't say Marcus Foligno and speed in the same sentence. Like, I'm sorry. Like you said, I'm very critical of that guy. I don't think he is good for what he is. But if anybody can agree on anything with that guy, it's that he's a big lumbering forward. He's not fast, and he's never been fast. And I didn't see it in context, but I can't imagine how you make any kind of argument that he is that not only that he is or that speed is the key to the Wild's game, because it's not, but that he's a part of that. That's ludicrous to me. I don't that does not compute on so many levels.
Maybe that speaks more to the other players on the roster who haven't exactly performed up to standards here in the first few games. That, Marcus Foligno's speed has been kind of pointed out as being a point for the Wild to maybe drive offense.
And Marcus Foligno, who has not registered a single point yet this season, has 2 shots on goal.
Who also didn't register a single point before game number 4, Mikael Granlund. So there you go.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. There's plenty of problems with the Wild, but if you're looking at Marcus Foligno, like you said, you're looking in the wrong direction.
Going to Granlund, good Lord, he was just not good for 3 games, and it just looks bad when that 3 games comes at the beginning of the season and there's a 0 next to your name and points.
Right.
Woof.
Yeah, well.
Anyone else really just kind of stick out as being a major disappointment in the first few games before we try to, quickly shift gears and get a positive thought in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned Nino before, and we're both huge Nino fans.
The good boy.
The good hockey boy himself. And it should be said that he is 4th in the team in shots. He has fired 10 shots in 4 games, but just 1 assist is disappointing. And I think his line combinations aren't doing him a whole lot of good. I mean, he had to play with Eric Fair on Saturday night, and I don't think that's going to supercharge anybody's offense. I don't know. It's a little bit of disappointment in him, but it's also understandable because he's not getting the minutes as usual, and he's not getting really a very helpful line assignment either. So I don't know. There's plenty of guys. I think you can call it the defense as a whole. I mean, I don't think a team with Ryan Suter, Jared Spurgeon, Matt Dumba, and Jonas Brodin should be allowing 83 shot attempts in a game. And I just don't understand how that even happens. Like, this defense has 3 guys that you could make a strong argument that could be all-star defenders. I don't think Suter, obviously his reputation precedes him. Dumba, I know he's not known for his defense, but it's not, he's one of those up-and-coming guys, and Spurgeon is absurdly underrated and is kind of a dark horse a little bit to be an all-star at some point, I feel like. And yet this team is just getting absolutely waxed. And I know the forwards are the problem. I know the forwards are not playing well, and they're getting absolutely destroyed in the neutral zone, and that's not doing the defense any favors. But if you're strong on the defensive end, you need to look like it on occasion, even if your forwards aren't playing well.
Right. And for me, the guy who needs to just be very good out of the gate here is Charlie Coyle. And this is a guy who had a completely terrible 2017-18 season, and most of it was decimated by, the same wrist injuries.
Yeah.
But he's come out of the gate and really hasn't looked all that great, and he got that gift of a goal on Thursday against Carolina, and honestly, it was just, crashing the net, right place, right time, and it's kind of a goal you want to see more from him, but then the graphic, this is what really stood out to me, was FSN put up a graphic that said, Charlie Coyle, 11th power play goal of career.
Oh, my God.
Charlie Coyle, who has pretty much been a mainstay with the Minnesota Wild since a third of the way through that lockout-shortened season of 2012-2013.
Yeah.
has 11 power play goals.
Yeah, he's always been garbage on the power play.
11. And
Yeah.
a guy with his stature, he's what? 6'3", 220. This is a guy who should be parked in front of your net scoring garbage goals. And he only has 11 of those. In, what is that? 6-7 years?
Yeah.
Just completely frustrating. And for most Wild fans, it's even more frustrating when you associate him with the Brent Burns trade, which I really try to not to.
Yeah, it's tough because I don't think I don't know that his skill set is super suited for the power play. I don't think he has a tremendous shot. And yeah, he does have size, but as you mentioned, he just doesn't seem to use it. I mean, it's like him and Zach Parise switched bodies. Parise plays like he's 6'3", 225, and Coyle likes to play like he's 5'10", 190. It's the most bizarre thing, and I think that is a huge reason why Coyle is basically non-existent on the power play. And to be honest, I don't think he's been used a ton on the power play. I think that 11 goals just kind of speaks to the two coaches that he's had, or three coaches that he's had, knowing that he's not really an asset on the power play. He's a guy who scored a lot of goals on kind of getting some breakaways and getting some odd man rushes and stick handling well on those. But I think in the kind of half court offense that the power play usually revolves around, I don't think he's all that useful, and that makes it really frustrating because that's a good way to kind of rack up points and to kind of prove your worth if you're a guy like him that really needs to prove his worth, and it's just not happening.
With that said, Minnesota Wild will have a fuller week ahead after just the pair of games from the previous week. They get kicked off right on Monday in Nashville at the Predators, 7 p.m. Then they are right back home Tuesday against the Arizona Coyotes. And then they have Dallas on Friday night, and then back at home against the Tampa Bay Lightning on Saturday before they get another lovely 4 days off before their next game. So a pretty full and a pretty challenging week ahead when you look at it. And literally, you can't take any of those teams lightly. And that includes Arizona, who many figure could be a team on the rise this year. But you've got Nashville, who was the best team in the Western Conference last year, and then you have Dallas, who under new coach Jim Montgomery have been very, very good, and we'll get to them later. And then the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are perennial favorites in the Eastern Conference again. So a very daunting week ahead for the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah. To your point real quick, I just looked up Charlie Coyle's power play time on ice. In the last 3 seasons, he is 10th on the team in time on ice on the power play. Minute and 50 seconds per game of power play time. So he just is not relied on in the power play, and I guess we kind of see why with that production.
Any kind of thoughts on the week ahead? I threw it out there. It's a pretty challenging week, but man, for a team that has not looked good in 4 games out of the gate, that is not a 4-game week that you really want to see. You're hoping for maybe some lighter opponents to maybe build up a little bit of confidence or a little bit of solid play, but yikes, the Wild have to find their game, and they have to find it quick, because otherwise they could, we could be sitting here next week talking about a completely abysmal week.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note in the first 4 games, they've played one playoff team from last season. And that's a little misleading because I think the Avs are good. I think the Blackhawks are the Blackhawks, as we know. And I think the Canes are, a talented young team, even though they aren't a playoff team. But Vegas at the same time is off to a horrific start too, or kind of they had a better game on Saturday, but they were off to a bad start before that. So I guess the hope would be is that, with some tougher matchups coming up, maybe they play up to the competition a little bit. Maybe, maybe there's this slow start against teams that weren't really all that imposing, 3 non-playoff teams and a team that they swept last season. Maybe, they realize that this isn't going to be kind of a walk in the park and they're gifted a playoff spot and gifted 100 points like every other Bruce Boudreau team. Maybe they're going to click to it and realize they have to work for it. And it's unfortunate that that's even the case, but human psychology is a really funny thing, and I've kind of beat this drum a lot over the last couple of years, but it's really kind of impossible to nail that kind of stuff down. And maybe that's just what this team needs. Maybe this team needs to be punched in the mouth a little bit. Maybe this team needs to realize that they shouldn't buy into their own hype, and they really have to work for it, and they really have to outwork their opponents because they're facing a lot of teams that have more talent than they do.
Hi, this is Bruce Boudreau. I don't see how in Toronto that they're calling it, unless it's a guy they just pulled in off the street that hasn't seen hockey before. If I were the fans, I'd be booing even more because that, they pay good money for this. If you want it, don't just think you want it. Go out and f***ing want it.
The Bruce Boudreau quote of the week coming in the wake of Saturday night's loss to Carolina. Following the game, Bruce Boudreau met with the media in the wake of the 5-4 overtime defeat. And he says, and I quote, "The first 2 periods were actually embarrassing." Quote. I don't know about you, but it's a little bit alarming to get that kind of a line 4 games into the regular season.
Yeah.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier, I don't want to call out the coaching staff, and I don't want to say that Boudreau is not the guy, because I don't believe that. I believe that he is the guy, and if this team is going to succeed, it's with him. That being said, he has a new boss, and there's nothing that new GMs like to do more than fire the coach hired by their predecessors. So it starts to get to a point where how abysmal of a start is it going to take for Fenton to decide that Boudreau has lost the room, or Boudreau doesn't have the magic touch on this team like he should have. You know what I mean? That's a very valid concern for me, because I think that Boudreau is probably the best they can come up with right now as far as the coaching goes. But it would not surprise me either to see Fenton put in a guy that he wants, or fire Boudreau with the intent of hiring a guy that his guy this next offseason. So
it's hard for me to think that Bruce Boudreau will get fired mid-season regardless of how bad the Wild start or play, and
I hope you're right.
It just does feel like, Paul Fenton is going to want to, make more changes with the team rather than the coach, because if you're Paul Fenton, you're coming into a team that's coached by Bruce Boudreau, and that's pretty good. Like,
yeah,
most general managers don't come into a situation like that, and there's certainly faults with Boudreau, and we can go ad nauseum on those, but I think more of the problems lie in the team itself, and that makes me believe he's less likely to get fired during the year. And if there was a change coming, it would be during the next offseason, because that's, new general managers want to go with their own guys, but like I said, you're inheriting Bruce Boudreau as a head coach. That's a pretty good thing, and Boudreau has had immense success in the regular season, and the fact that the Wild aren't doing overly well should more speak to the fact that the roster is problematic than the head coach.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
So that's kind of where I'm at with that, and that's our Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
Yeah, I've been scoreboard watching since opening night. So I don't know if that counts or anything, but I think hockey players are hockey players, and they want to see where they are, and they know how close everything is. They know that every game is vital.
In the Central Division, for those just tuning in, this is a new segment on the Giles and Goy podcast where we highlight the Central Division and how teams are doing and where the Wild are at. We're just basically highlighting how everything's going. And as we record here Sunday night, Nashville Predators, Chicago Blackhawks tied at 8 points in 5 games played at top the Central Division. Colorado at 7 points, Dallas and Winnipeg at 6 points, and then Minnesota and St. Louis tied for last. Although Minnesota has the edge over St. Louis with just 4 games played to the Blues 5. And Chicago, as we saw on Thursday, Chicago playing some really good hockey offensively. They have tallied 22 goals in their first 5 games, but in the absence of Corey Crawford, they have some liabilities in goal with Cam Ward. So they have given up 21 goals in 5 games. But, watching Chicago on Thursday night and seeing, how Jonathan Toews played going into that game, he kind of looks like a little bit of a different player this year. And, maybe it's just the first few games, but you've got to really like that if you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan. That's got to be terrifying, especially for the Wild, who, when they get burned by Jonathan Toews, they get burned badly. We recall, the Wild making the panic trade for Martin Hanzal because Jonathan Toews burned them for 5 points before the Wild went into their bye week. And then they came out of that bye week and they traded for Martin Hanzal because the Wild didn't really have an answer for Jonathan Toews. And then Toews had a really bad year last year, but if he's on the bounce back again this year, I didn't tweet this out during Thursday, but what kind of panic trade are the Wild going to make this year to counteract Jonathan Toews? Because if he's on and he's really good, the Wild just don't have an answer for him, and that's really been the problem in past years. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, I would agree. I could not be more thankful of Stan Bowman for solving his backup goaltending issues by signing Cam Ward this offseason. My God. If they had a competent backup right now, they'd probably be 5-0.
Yeah, they'd be top of the division.
I mean, I know Corey Crawford is probably due to come back relatively soon. I only know this because I own him in fantasy, but any more time that they can start Cam Ward is helpful to the rest of the division because, as bad as that team's defense is, if they have a bad goaltender on top of that, it's going to be rough for them. So they better hope that when Crawford comes back, he stays healthy to the tune of about 60 to 65 games because any more of Cam Ward is going to doom that team. But yeah, I'm with you on the rest of the division. It's tough. I mean, I don't know how the Wild are only 4 points back of the lead because I guess it's early in the season, but it's going to be an absolute meat grinder all season long, just like it is every year in the Central.
Blues not off to a very good start, and I know, shocking. I've seen old pal Mike Yeo have a few strong words to say post game following a bad loss. So,
has he used the line, "I'm not gonna say this, but I'll say," and then he says basically the exact same thing?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was one of his favorites. I love that one.
that's a given. And what's even more stunning is 4 of the first 5 games for the Blues have come at home, and they've only won 1 game. So that's pretty bad. So
that's what happens when Jake Allen is ass.
Yeah, that's what you get. So.
Right out Spitberkin. Kaprizov across the goose end. Kaprizov shoots and he scores! He scores! The Russians are golden in South Korea.
This is the part of the episode where we highlight standout wild prospect Kirill Kaprizov, who represents the last hope. Probably the last hope for the Minnesota Wild and this core to do anything of note. We also started this segment last week. We noted Kaprizov had 8 points in 14 games. So in the last week, he has played 3 games, and he has tallied 5 points in those 3 games. So now up on the season total, Kaprizov with 8 goals and 5 assists. And he, as we tweeted out from our podcast Twitter account at GATG Wild Podcast, had an absolute snipe early in the week that looked very reminiscent to the Carl Soderberg goal in the Wild opener a week ago Thursday, where he used the defenseman of the screen and pretty much hit the corner of the net. And I don't know about you, but I can't see anyone else on the Wild making that shot. Like, I correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody else on the Wild roster makes that shot.
Yeah, I think that it's important because we chose to talk about Kaprizov for a good reason, because we talk a lot about what's going to turn this team around and what is going to help the Wild take that next step. And I think Kaprizov is kind of the be-all, end-all answer to all this, because it's like this kid has such immense talent that he's the type of player that changes the whole hockey team around him, regardless of who's on it. You know what I mean? Like, he makes the whole team better. So I think there's good reason to spotlight him. I mean, he's absolutely that kind of talent. And no, there isn't anybody on the Wild like him. I mean, Parise is certainly an all-star. Suter is certainly very good at what he does. We all love Eric Stahl. But I think this kid is kind of, I don't want to say generational talent, because I think that gets thrown around a lot. But I think he's definitely the kind of guy. He has the ceiling of the best player in the game. I don't know that he's going to get there, and I don't know that that's, fair to him. But he at least has that kind of ceiling where it's like, this guy could lead the NHL in points one day, and I don't think there's anybody on the Wild that really can say that.
No, there is not. As we transition out of that into Prospect Watch, do you have a Minnesota Wild prospect not named Kirill Kaprizov that you want to highlight?
I do. So in the 3rd round this past summer's draft, the Wild picked a center named Connor DeWar. And
the whiskey?
Yes, you can certainly use as many whiskey jokes as you want. But surprisingly to me, the WHL is already well underway on their season, and they have already played 8 games in the season. And in those 8 games, Mr. DeWar has 12 points. He has 7 goals and 5 assists, and that's not bad. So it's really kind of off to a great start. He's with the Everett Silvertips in the WHL, and so I mean it's really kind of a good sign that the Wild have somebody who's producing at a high level in the minors. Even if this guy isn't a mega heralded prospect, it's good that there's some guys out there kicking names and taking ass.
As long as it's silver tips, not frosted tips.
You know what? Maybe that was their name in the late 90s. Maybe they were the Everett Frosted Tips. I mean, because this is like the Seattle area, so maybe that look was kind of in there for a while, but for whatever reason they changed it to silver tips.
And on that note, we go to the last segment, jerseys.
Woo!
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Well, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
This is the segment of the show where Ben and I talk about jerseys because that is what we do best. And Ben, what is our jersey topic this week?
Well, you may or may not know the NBA tips off this week. So we get to talk about basketball jerseys, which is something I believe we have not done on this podcast before.
Have never done that, and
yeah,
I just looked
venturing
at
into New Jersey territory here.
I just looked at the jersey schedule, and you are correct in that the basketball jerseys is on the docket for today.
Uh-huh.
You threw me for a loop when you made me think we were going for something different earlier today.
No, I told you that was next week, but you've had a little bit to drink today.
I was too emotional.
You've had a couple of fashionable adult beverages. So
no, I'm just emotional.
I understand how you misunderstood what I told you.
All right. So, what do you want to lead this off?
Sure. So, we talk about other sports jerseys this season. I think we should just kind of shoot for maybe a couple of our favorites from history.
Yep.
And some kind of maybe some Mount Rushmore type stuff, and also I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring up some really awful jerseys. I think that's pretty fun to talk about.
We have to talk about the good and the bad. We probably more appreciate the bad more than the good, just because they're so bad that they're great.
Yes. So along the good lines, I don't know if you have a whole lot of favorite basketball jerseys, but I've done kind of some thinking about this. I haven't done a ton of research, but I've discovered, for whatever reason, I kind of dig pinstriped basketball jerseys.
Okay.
And I'm not really positive why that is, but like the original Orlando Magic, the Shaquille O'Neal era Orlando Magic jerseys, I thought those were great.
Yep. That was...
And same thing for the Reggie Miller era Pacers jerseys.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I'm not really positive. Also, Charlotte Hornets 90s jerseys.
Yep.
With the pinstripes. I don't know what it is, and don't get me wrong, I do love the simple jerseys. I think the Celtics are beautiful. I think the Lakers have a good look. I really do like the Spurs. I think that might be one of the top jerseys in the NBA of all time. I like that simple look. But there's just something about pinstripes on basketball jerseys that does it for me.
No, those are very good picks. And to maybe go a little bit more into those. Not necessarily into the pinstripes, but there's some stripes on these, not in the traditional sense, but the Vince Carter Toronto Raptors jerseys always stand out to me as just great. And some people probably just look at these as bad, but Vince Carter and the Toronto, more so when Vince Carter broke into the league. With the actual Raptor on it, and then they kind of they planed it down a little bit, which was still a pretty good look, but those are very good. And as you said, like the Orlando Magic, that's such a good look. Oh my lord, that's I'd be remiss if I said the Michael Jordan era Bulls jerseys were very good. They're just very simple,
of course,
very well done. And then in the NBA, especially when it comes to NBA, we've probably lost all our listeners at this point because we started talking about NBA. But I'm a big into traditional or throwbacks essentially. So like the Los Angeles Lakers Showtime era jerseys are very good to me, and the fact that the Lakers now here in 2018 have decided to try to angle back more to those is very good. The Boston Celtics have never really changed their look, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
A very clean look, and the New York Knicks, they've had a few different looks over the years, but they've kind of cleaned that up too. So I really like what they're going for now, although they're really a tire fire right now.
Yes.
I'm biased for like the Kevin Garnett era Timberwolves jerseys.
Yeah.
As he said, it's a shit storm right now, but back in his day, it was a good time. And then in my last one, I'm gonna put this in there. The Seattle SuperSonics. I love their uniforms so much, and some loved them, some did not, and I am firmly in the crowd of I loved them no matter what they were. The Sonics just had a really good look no matter what. So that's the one I'm gonna end on is the Sonics.
Yeah. So I think certainly as almost exactly how it went with NHL. I think when you're looking for bad NBA jerseys, I think you start with the 90s.
Yes.
And you start with the use of the color teal, where it didn't belong.
Grizzlies.
The Grizzlies actually the first team that came to my mind is the Detroit Pistons.
Oh, the flaming horse.
The flaming horse. And don't get me wrong, like I thought that was kind of cool back then because I was 9. But I can't think of anything that's aged worse than that jersey. I mean, poor Grant Hill had to play a solid part of his career in that jersey.
And then they made like a red alternate in the flaming horse, which was bad. And the flaming horse, you're either talking about the Detroit Pistons or the Calgary Flames.
I'm looking at the red flaming horse right now. That is a putrid jersey. Oh my god.
The 90s the 90s really did no favors to the NBA. Like at least some NHL teams kept it clean in the 90s. Like 98% of NBA teams in the 90s did not. So.
Yeah. One jersey that I think bucks it. It's the exception that proves the rule about my like of pinstripes on a jersey. The 90s Rockets jerseys.
Yes.
They were. I mean, they have a special place in a lot of people's hearts because those teams were pretty good. But that gigantic logo in the middle of the jersey, kind of covering up the numbers, which is unusual for basketball.
Rocket.
Yeah, and the fact that the stripes are interrupted on that jersey because of the gigantic logo is just like, oh my god! Like
Charles Barkley had to wear a big smiling rocket.
Like it just like the jersey looks like those Target knockoff jerseys that like they can use the logos because they paid the fee, but they can't make an exact replica of the jersey. Like that's what that jersey looks like, except that team actually wore those jerseys.
They did, and it's still so good to look at, though. Like I just. All right, since nobody's really listening anymore because we've been talking about basketball, I could probably wrap this show up. Ben, you have any final thoughts?
No, I encourage people to look at my article on zone coverage. I was fairly proud of it this week. I kind of ask, a very important question about how long fans can put up with this wild team, kind of paper cutting them to death. And I think that it raises some interesting questions, and I'm interested to see how the whole situation turns out, but I don't know that it's going to be all that positive. So I don't know. I encourage people to read that. I think that it's an interesting read at least. And I'd love any kind of feedback on it. But other than that, I just hope that something clicks with this team. Otherwise, we start getting into starting the season with a swoon, and what does that do to this team? I think that's a very dangerous proposition to start the season in such a hole when you were already fighting an uphill battle. Even if you got up to a good start, I think this season was going to be an uphill battle for the Wild, and starting in a shallow grave is certainly very, very far from ideal for making the playoffs.
My final thought is this is a week I have long waited for. You will all have to bear with me as I just try to hold it together. I'm actually not, maybe surprised to some, I'm actually not going to Southern California over the next weekend. But Paul Kariya's number is finally being retired, and as I texted Ben today, I was reminded of it, and it was already emotional. So bear with me as I try to hold it together, as I'm sure the Anaheim Ducks are going to put on a wonderful show during the week, and probably more closer to the weekend, to remind us of what was. This is something long overdue, and we'll talk about that next Sunday when we have our next Jersey segment. But there's a lot of feelings. So that's what I'll say. And if you don't understand why I love Paul Kariya so much, and if you're new to this podcast, I don't even know where to start. I don't even think we ever had a episode of this podcast where I fully explained it. So we might do that next Sunday with our segment. So
that's fair.
That's what we'll do. But yeah, that's a wonderful way to cap off birthday weekend for Giles Farrell. So I didn't even think of that until 10 seconds ago. That's happening on my birthday weekend. So I'm not sure there's a better way to end the weekend. So
no,
that's my final thought.
We'll have to find a way to watch that somehow.
Yeah. No, I will have it on somehow. I've already made it known to many people that, I can do things on next Sunday, but, there's a cutoff time of, I can do things until this time, and then after that is it. So
okay, so 3 p.m. on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. Once the Vikings game goes final, I am going to do my own thing. So
right.
That can do it for this episode of the Giles and the Goalie podcast. You can follow myself at Giles Farrell, or you can follow Ben at Ben Remington when he returns from his Twitter hiatus, for which I do not blame him for going on right now. And then we have a podcast Twitter account at GATG Wild Podcast. We also write for a website called Zone Coverage. You can follow them at Zone Coverage MN on Twitter for your social media needs. You can find this otherwise fine podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Those are the main ones.
Yeah.
So with that said, that on the other side has been Remington. I am Giles Farrell. We will chat with you again next week.
Later.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.